Hello everyone, this is Mr. Martinez from your biology teacher, and I typed things here that I don't think I meant to type. There we go. And this is a video on how to maybe try to get a start on the moose poo activity that you guys are doing right now, because it's kind of a big activity, and there's some reading and there's some graphs that we have to look at and stuff, and we wanted to make sure that we could give you the proper resources so that you knew kind of what to do and how to read some of these things. So the first thing you're gonna do is there's this reading that you have to do here, and it's not too big. It basically talks about the diet of moose in a certain place and how scientists are interested in analyzing it. So the first thing you're gonna have to do is to read this, and it'll take a few minutes, and make sure that you take your time and take notes if it helps you. And one thing that we recommend is to highlight or underline key ideas so that you can go back to them later with these, because you'll see them very easily. So to highlight something, you just have to select it, right? And then you can go over to here. This is the highlighter, and you can say I'm gonna highlight it with light green or something. And then when you're reading, you can be like, oh, this is in light green. Why is it in light green? Because I probably thought it was important. So anyways, with that done, with that said, go ahead and get a reading of this. And once that is done, we will move on to the questions. So the first thing that you're gonna have to do is answer what is the hypothesis. And a hypothesis is basically a proposed explanation for an observation. So for something like this, it can often look like an if statement, and it's something like, well, if this is happening, then this is going to happen in consequence. So I'm not allowed to give you the answer for this one, so I'm gonna leave it up to you guys, and just go back to the reading, and look for a statement that looks like if this then that, or something along those lines, and highlight it with green. And again, to highlight, you're just gonna go like this, click the highlighter, click green, boom. All right, moving on. Once you have selected the hypothesis, now is when we get into the nitty-gritty of the activity, is looking at scientific data. And now this can be a little bit daunting at first, but hang on, it'll be I'm pretty sure you guys will understand it by the end of the activity for sure. So the first thing we encounter is this table, and this table is separated in there's regions. There's west and east region, and then there's for each year through from 2004 to 2013, and for each of the regions there's a data point on different types of vegetation in both the moose diet and in the environment. So the way you'd look this is like, so in the west region, in the year 2005, 16.8 of the average percent moose diet was balsam fir. That is to say, 17% of the things that the moose ate that year was balsam fir. But the thing that they ate the most were cedar and deciduous plants at 41% each for the west region in 2005. Meanwhile, in the west region in 2005, the average percent of these plants in the environment were different. So while 41% of the things that they ate was cedar, only 15% of the plants in the environment are actually cedar. So in this case, they ate more cedar was eaten than cedar was in the environment. Whereas for something like deciduous, they did eat a lot of deciduous. 41.8% of the things that they ate were deciduous plants, but there's a lot of deciduous in the area that year. So that is kind of how you read this graph. So take a second, try to find different points, and try to do the same explanation that I just did for different points in the graph to see if you guys can understand it and get the hang of it. Not graph, table. This is a table, not a graph, my bad. Now is when we get to graphs. Okay, so there's 3 graphs, one for each type of plant. We had balsam fir, cedar, and deciduous, and we have balsam fir, cedar, and deciduous. So I'm gonna help you guys look through the first one, and once we've gone over the first one, you guys can probably look at the second and third one on your own, because they are all the same type of graph. We use different shaped dots just to differentiate between the 3. Okay, so the way this graph is set up is that we have percent balsam fir in the environment on the x-axis down here. So this 30 equates to 30% balsam fir in the environment. And on the y-axis, we have percent balsam fir in moose diet, so what the moose actually ate. And then for each dot has, and this you can count them. There are 10 dots of each color. That is the 10 west dots and the 10 east dots for a total of 20. And for each of these lines is represented as a dot in this graph. So then the way you want to look at this, there's this line in the middle. Anything that is in this line means that the moose ate about the same amount as there was in the environment. So for example, this dot right here says that there's about 20% balsam fir in the environment, and the moose ate about a 20% balsam fir, which is slightly less. So this one is like the moose in this year ate slightly less balsam fir in this region than balsam fir was found on the region itself. Whereas if you look at, let's say, this one, right? In this case, there was a 40% balsam fir in the environment. That is 40% of the plants were balsam fir. But the moose ate 70% of the things they ate was balsam fir. So they ate a lot of it. They ate a higher percentage of it than percentage of it was present in the area. So you want to use these dots, and don't think too much about the greens and the blues. The questions that we ask are not depending on one region over the other too much. As much as think about like, how many dots do I see over this line? How many dots do I see under this line? For each dot that you see over, that is 1 year in which the moose were eating more of this than in percentage than it was represented in the location itself. That is that they showed a preference to eat this type of thing that year. So now that I've mentioned this, I want you to make observations for graph 1. And like for example, one thing that I might notice is that for the most part in the in the east region, most of the time the percentage balsam fir in the environment doesn't change from year to year, right? These are all, even though they're on different parts of this axis, they're all on the same area for the x-axis, right? For all of these years, the balsam fir in the environment was about 45%. And then there's some dots that are around, and then there's this 1 year where the population exploded, and there was a lot of it. And something else that I might say is that the moose seems to have a preference for balsam fir because for the most part, the dots happen to be over this middle line right here. They're over this middle point. And so with that said, once you've made your observations for graph 1, we're going to ask you to do the same thing for this graph and this graph. So they all look a little different, but the structure is essentially the same. You're looking at that line in the middle and where the dots line up based on that line. So once you've gone over all 3 of the graphs and you have a solid understanding of what moose seem to have in terms of like, do they have a preference for eating? Do they just eat whatever they find? Once you have an idea of this, we can start to tackle the last questions. And this is the very last thing that we have to do for this activity. So if you've made it this far into the video, there is an extra credit question at the very end of the activity that asks for what my favorite food is. My favorite food is white rice because it doesn't have a lot of flavor by itself, but it will absorb whatever you cook it with, and it's also, in my opinion, the best side dish you can have. So there will be a question that it's not present right now at the time of making this video at the end of the activity, but it should be there when you guys have it. So anyways, moving on, interpreting the data. So there's a bunch of questions here, and we're not gonna go over all of them because the video would be way too long. But let's see. Let's look at some of them. Let's look at the first one. Make a claim. Make a claim that answers the scientific question: do moose randomly eat plants in their environment, or do they show a preference for certain food types? And that scientific question right here, this one, is the same that you found over here, this question. So based on what you've seen in the data, right, based on these observations that you've made for graphs 1, 2, and 3, you can now answer the questions: do you think that moose randomly eat plants in their environment, or do they show preferences for certain food types? And you can, so this is a yes or no question, and ideally you'd answer yes or no for each of the 3 different types of plants. So they show a preference for balsam fir, cedar, or deciduous plants. And do they show a preference, or are they just randomly eating them as they find them along the way? And then question number 2, what evidence was used to write your claim? Reference specific parts of the table or graphs. So at this point, what it's asking you to do is to answer for each of the yeses or nos that you gave to question 1. Why do you think that? What things in the changes and trends and patterns did you notice in either the graph or the table that are helping you make that claim? What is it about the data that you saw that gave you that opinion? And then for the last few questions, I think I'm going to leave it to you guys so that this video doesn't get way too long. And I believe that if you guys have made it this far, you can definitely answer questions 3, 4, and 5. And if you guys have any questions at all, remember that we're here to support you and we're here to help you. So any question is a good question, no matter if you think it's a little silly or whatever. It doesn't matter to us. Anything that is not super clear to you is a thing that we can help you in. Well, I hope this helps.